Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. In fact, consider grabbing yourself two, because we might be here for a while. We're going to be talking about the 3.16.0 patch notes that were dropped unexpectedly yesterday. So this is the entirety of the patch notes as they currently stand for Scourge League. They're all subject to change, but we'll have a look and see what changes from here. If you're interested just in looking at some of the highlights of it, I've made separate videos, link in the description below. One already that covers the changes to boss drop uniques, and one that covers the changes to quivers, because I thought they were just interesting things that were easily missed. But there's a lot in this, so this video is going to be long. Okay, so the first thing that's mentioned is the usual intro to the Scourge Challenge League. I think that the best way to go through this is not to reiterate everything here. I figure that anyone that's watching the video on the full patch notes is someone that's already watched the trailer for Scourge. If you haven't, link below to where I have a look through that and discuss some of the things that come up about the Scourge League itself. I find it's generally best to assess the league mechanic once you've actually played with it a bit, both in the Axe and at endgame, because it does tend to play a bit differently. Like every league mechanic plays differently during the Axe and at endgame. Major new content and features, there's a number of new skill gems. Now, the first one I want to talk about is Energy Blade. This is a really interesting new gem. We don't know all the details of how it works, but basically it seems to conjure it seems to consume 80% of your maximum energy shield for a period. So it's a buff that sits on your character, much like things like Blood Rage. And while this buff is active, it consumes 80% of your maximum energy shield and sort of converts that into a weapon that replaces whatever your equipped weapons are. These weapons deal staggering amounts of lightning damage, and that lightning damage scales based upon your character's total energy shield. The numbers on it look really high, and so this could potentially be quite good, but this is just going to take so much playing around with to get a sense of exactly what the best way to use it is. But it does definitely have me interested, and it's the sort of thing that could conceivably be used as some sort of league starter. Definitely can be used in conjunction with Spectral Throw, so if you're doing that, what you would have is an Energy Blade would be linked up in some way. We've got to check how much you can support this gem, but you would have Energy Blade linked with a few things to make it stronger. Then you would have a 6-link Spectral Throw, and that would be your primary skill set. Now, you don't necessarily need to use Spectral Throw. You could use whatever else you wanted to use. That said, it does turn them into swords, so that means that there's a number of skill gems you won't be able to use with it. Added Temporal Rift. Temporal Rift I discussed a bit in the Scourge League spoiler video, but it's a kind of zany gem that lets you basically continually... So while you've got Temporal Rift active, it reserves 10% of your mana, but it constantly snapshots your character, and your character... 4 things about your character are snapshotted. Your life, your mana, your energy shield, and your location. These are constantly snapshotted, and at any time you can revert to your position as you were about 4 seconds earlier. This will be interesting in conjunction with unavoidable damage from bosses. So if you've got a boss that does survivable damage, but it's sort of damage that's really harsh, you can just take that damage, then revert it. It can also be used in conjunction with cuss when damage taken, loops, and things like that. All sorts of random shenanigans you can do with it. I'm sure that there will be lots of weird and wonderful things people discover with this. Added a new skill gem, Tornado. This is a really complex skill. It creates a very, very slow-moving tornado. At least it starts out very slow, that absorbs damage that you fire at it in the form of projectiles. Then the tornado deals that damage to everything it strikes from then onwards. This seems like a skill that is useful if you've got a skill that is really good at damaging enemies with hits, and has really good damage projection but doesn't have very good single target. I think the Tornado may be something you want to at least experiment with to see if it's something that can allow you to focus some damage for bosses. That said, really hard to know whether this is going to be good or not. It doesn't look mechanically strong, but it does look mechanically interesting, so that's something to play around with. A Poisonous Concoction was explained next. This is basically another way to yeet flasks like Explosive Concoction. Explosive Concoction is getting buffed because it was terrible in 3.15. A Poisonous Concoction, the numbers look pretty good on this. A few people are pretty enthused about it, and it uses your life flasks charges. Using up charges on life flasks is a lower opportunity cost than sort of devoting entire flask slots to elemental damage resistance flasks like ruby flasks and the like. as Explosive Concoction asks you to do. So that may make Poisonous Concoction something that's a bit easier to play around with than Explosive Concoction. It does something pretty powerful, so it may end up being pretty good. Next, we've got Soul Link, Protective Link, and Intuitive Link. These are some of the new Link skills. I discussed in a little bit of depth the Destructive Link, which was revealed today. So basically, though, all of these forge a bond with another player by default. By default, it's a player, but you can spec into options that let you target your minions. If the character you link to, if you initiate a link and the object you link to dies, then so do you. So you don't want to use these frivolously, and you don't want to use them on players that you don't trust. But it gives a considerable buff to the player that's receiving the link, and this buff comes in the form of them taking on some of your stats. So, for instance, Intuitive Link, which is probably the most exciting one, that player's melee hits trigger your spells. So that seems like a really cool thing. Your spells will then be linked to Intuitive Link. Then there's a bunch of other ones, and it's just generally interesting options that you can use. Next up, there's 13 new Divination cards. These so far have all been high impact cards. Now, if you're in solo self-found, some of them will be of less interest. But if you're in a trade league, I think that every single one that's been revealed so far is going to be something that is worth at least considering. Like, if you pick it up off the ground, it's either going to be a meaningful amount of loot, or it's something that's going to be worth considering trying to trade for the rest of the set. So that will be something. I always find divination cards are underrated in terms of the impact they tend to have on the game. They can often add a number of things into the game that otherwise wouldn't exist because the opportunity cost to create them is too high. 6 new unique items, and oh, these are big. Some of these are really, really high impact. There's an absolutely ridiculous belt, an absolutely ridiculous amulet, and there's also an absolutely ridiculous chest piece. In fact, there's 2 ridiculous amulets. There's the Ulnatol one, and there's the Blight one. So yeah, there's a lot of really strong looking uniques. We also got the gloves today, which were revealed, and I posted an earlier video on them. So Expedition is going core with a few adjustments, more details later. Perandus is being taken out the back and is being put to sleep, unfortunately. So Perandus is being removed entirely from the game, and they will be replaced basically with Expedition. I won't miss Perandus. I think it's one of those mechanics that when it's good, it's sort of unsatisfyingly good because it just devalues all of the unique items that you get. So, like, I know in 3.13, Perandus was pretty strong, but like I got a bunch of genuinely rare uniques from him, and I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that because my coins are worth more than the item. So, you know, it's like things like Impulse's Broken Heart, genuinely good item, something people want, and it was just, the number of coins it's costing, it's not worth taking. And that happened a few times. I think the only thing I ever took off him was a single Exalted Orb in that league. I even rolled over a Chevron's Wrappings because it wasn't worth taking. And so that's what Perandus was like when it was good. One thing that this does raise, though, and I have actually messaged Bex from GGG to advise him of this, is that there is a divination card that is only available through Perandus content at the moment. That is the divination card, the Cheetah. At least that's where we believe it to drop from. It certainly dropped for me from, I believe it was a Perandus safe. It's one of the Perandus. I think it's the Perandus one that Perandus chest that gives you a whole bunch of gems. I think it's the skill gem one. Maybe it's something else, but it's one of the rarer of the Perandus chests. Is the only known source for the Cheetah. And so for that reason, I messaged Bex to say, hey, this card might not be able to drop under the current way the game is set up, but I haven't heard anything back there. Introduced chromatic jewelers and fusing orb variants that can be used on corrupted items. There's been a bit of discussion about this on the PoE forums where people think that this takes away from the identity of corruption. In my opinion, it doesn't. In my opinion, the identity of corruption is not the sacrifice of the ability to further modify the item. The identity of corruption is taking a big risk in order to get a very slight improvement on an item. And so to that effect, I don't think that these do anything particularly significant. Additionally, all of these functions can be done via the crafting bench anyway. So it's just a better way of doing the socket modification than being reliant upon the crafting bench and awkward to find crafts. Additionally, we've got the Tainted Blessing, which allows items to be, which can be placed in the Divine Font in order to allow it to corrupt in order to allow it to enchant corrupted gloves, boots, or helmets. This is going to be significant for a few things. So a lot of people think that this is sort of rubbish tier or mediocre or whatever. This actually is a pretty big deal for purposes of trying to target farm 2 implicit corrupted helmets that have specific enchantments on them. It was pretty hard to get a specific enchant and a specific corruption on the same helmet. Now it's possible, it's much more possible now that the Tainted Blessing exists. And so I think that this will be, firstly, I think it'll be a very rare currency item. And it might only drop from very specific content, like maybe the Tribute Labyrinth or something like that. But it's the sort of thing that has a lot of potential at the top end. So yeah, I think that this will be pretty well received once people play with it. Essentially, it is solving a lot of the problems that the Tainted Oil solved, where any source of an amulet that was already corrupt was useless before the Tainted Oil existed. Then the Tainted Oil came along, and a whole lot of amulets that were not previously used were suddenly usable. Introducing the Sacred Orb, which has been a very controversial currency item already. I'm actually okay with it, but anyways, that's fine. Minor new content and features. This is something that will be really popular with colorblind players or people who are maybe not fully colorblind, but sort of like have a little bit more difficulty in discerning the difference between green and red than is common. And that is the gem socket notches are being changed around so that you can choose between 2 different options. I think one of them is going to be a subtle indicator as to what each color socket is, and then the other one is going to be a really glaring in-your-face one. So players have just got that agency that if they would prefer to have these notches be much more obvious, then they can. Essentially, it's colorblind mode that a fair number of people have been asking for. And here we have the big thing, that this is like going to be the biggest quality of life change, and not just quality of life. This is going to be a big change on the to the Path of Exile economy as well. So stackable items drop from chests and as rewards at the end of encounters, such as Delve, Rachel, Incursion, Delirium, and Blight, will no longer drop multiple stacks of the same item. They instead collate it into a single combined stack of the item. So what this means is that when you finish a Delve run, instead of getting 4 different chromatic orbs on the ground that your loot filter hides, you'll instead get 1 stack of 4 chromatic orbs, which your loot filter will probably show, at least at the start of the league. Likewise, you'll have the same thing for things like fusing orbs, or fuses will probably be on your loot filter for longer, jeweler's orbs, and importantly, scrolls of wisdom and portal scrolls. This is going to tremendously decrease the amount of clicking required to pick up all of these things. But the consequence of this, which will be a really interesting thing to see flow through, will be that because there's less of a barrier to picking these things up, more players will pick them up, and that's going to result in a lot of these things becoming worthless. I think we're going to see a situation where a lot of the low-end currencies will collapse in their trade value, and that's fine. I think it's one of those things that where there's good and bad together in that. I think you might still find yourself eventually at one point just not even bothering with packs of 8, like with a stack of 8 chromatic orbs. You might think, oh, you know what? I'm still not picking that up because it's still just an absolute crumb and it's not worth it. Whereas at the time I'm recording this video, 8 chromatic orbs is basically a chaos orb. Now, map fragments for the Apex of Sacrifice, Alluring Abyss, Shaper's Realm, Absence of Value and Meaning, and the Pale Court now have a stack size of 10. Scarabs now have a stack size of 10. This is a huge improvement, huge improvement. This is something that was mentioned earlier, but this is going to be absolutely out of sight for for a whole lot of things. This means that Apex of Sacrifice fragments, which you tend to use a fair bit in mapping just as, for an extra 5% quantity, they're actually going to be worth picking up again. They're going to be much less hassle to use, and you're just going to end up with heaps, it is going to be out of sight better in every imaginable way. Again, this is probably going to reduce the value of some of the, just by virtue of increasing convenience, it'll reduce the value of some of these things, like low-end scarabs and the Apex of Sacrifice entry keys. But again, I think that's fine. Incubators display item level on their tooltip and icon. This is a godsend for purposes of trading. Like for some of them, some of the incubators are very eye level sensitive as to whether you'd pick them up or not, and whether you'd want to use them or not if you have them. And so that's just a huge improvement. It's now possible to stack incubators of the same type and eye level, also with a stack size of 10. Again, just a huge improvement all around. It's now possible to promote a party member to replace you as the leader of your party if you're the current leader. This is one of those things that should have been done years ago. It's a really overdue change, but it's one of those things that is it's a quality of life change that's rarely going to matter, but when it does, it's really, really going to help a lot. Okay, so we've got a couple of things that are just purely here that are just purely cosmetic changes, which are all good, but not that important. And one thing that's important is that the balance of monsters in Act 2 has not yet been done. There was talk of a balance pass for Act 2, similar to the balance pass for Act 1 that happened in 3.15. This has been put off into the future just because of the COVID situation over in Auckland. That's caused GGG to lose some time in development, and that was one of the things that was cut out in this patch. Expedition changes. So Expedition appears in Act 6 onwards. Can I just say to GGG that Act 6 is probably, like, it's getting crowded. You add Abysses in Act 6. You add Expeditions now in Act 6. You add Heist in Act 6. Maybe spread these things out so they're introduced one per act. I think Expedition would be perfectly fine to bring in at Act 7 instead of Act 6, or maybe at Act 5. Just have it so that there's, you know, a little bit more time to get used to Abysses. Have them as the first thing. You don't want to have this situation where you kill Katava and then all of a sudden there's a tremendous boost of complexity. Ease it in slower. Like, you know, sure, even if you leave an Expedition where it is, maybe just remove Abysses from Act 6 for the moment. Leave them in 7. I think that would just be a better way. Now, this is the big change for Expedition. Artifacts are no longer tradable items. Now, artifacts does not include the reroll currencies. This has two effects. The first is they're auto-collected as you complete expeditions, and the second is that all characters can now engage with the merchants without having to feel that their best plan is to trade the currency away to other players who might use them more efficiently than them. And so, like, basically what's changing here, the key thing is that the expedition currencies now basically bind to account on acquire, but they're auto pickup. I think that this overall is going to be an improvement. It's slightly reducing player agency, like you lose the ability to trade them off, but it means that you can indeed use these currencies without fearing that the opportunity cost of doing so is too high. And also, they confirm here that the reroll currencies are still tradable. Now, this is a change I do not like. Logbooks now have a maximum area level of 83. I think that the decision to have logbooks be able to go as high as level 88, so the way that worked was that it was just the area level was equal to the item level of the logbook, and item levels went up to 88 so you'd be in a level 86, in a monster level 86 zone, which would be a map that had a tier 16 map naturally, that had the Misinformation Watchstone, the Terror Watchstone, and the Stalwart Defenders Watchstone all being used simultaneously. And then if you got one from a rare runic monster in one of those maps, you could get a monster level 88 logbook. I thought this was cool. You know, it's just it's just something that you can test your stronger characters against. It does potentially run the risk of devaluing item level 86 bases, but those are pretty cheap now anyway. So I think that this is something that GG should actually allow the logbooks to go back to 88 like they were before, but also allow heists to go to 88 as well. It just makes the content relevant for longer and lets you, lets you put yourself up against tougher monsters for just a little bit of fun. That said, I do think that Delirium rewards in particular need to cap at 83 in these zones. And that also goes for Delirium rewards in heists. Delirium rewards get much better at level 84, and I think that it would be fair to have only Delirium content be able to provide item level 84 cluster jewels. Anyways, that's enough of a whinge there about a change I didn't really like. Logbooks now display their area level on their item icon. This is just a simple quality of life change, but a good one. Now, replacing Perandus Scarabs with new Expedition Scarabs. This change affects existing Scarabs. Replaced the Decadent Incubator with a new Kalguran Incubator, which can be added to an equipable item, dropping an Expedition item after killing a certain number of monsters. This change affects existing Decadent Incubators. Now, this next one only applies to standard players. Existing Decadent Delirium Orbs will be replaced with Kalguran Delirium Orbs, which add layers of Delirium with the Expedition item reward type to maps. This is the only source of Kalguran Delirium Orbs. These are unattainable as item drops or from any other source. So, the existing Perandus Delirium Orbs are being changed into Expedition Delirium Orbs, but they're only available that way. But your Scarabs will change over to the new to Expedition Scarabs. Interesting to see the stats on the Expedition Scarabs. I don't believe they're known as yet. And these incubators again, like the Kalguran items can be pretty strong, and given that you can get an Expedition logbook from them, I think that these incubators could be quite good. That said, reserving judgment until we see them. Existing Metamorph organs that previously gave Perandus rewards will instead grant Expedition rewards. Expedition rewards cannot be obtained from new Metamorph encounters, so that's again a standard only thing. A couple of changes to Rogue's crafting prices, and monsters. There's an interesting little nerf here. Monsters spawned in Expedition counters now have 35% less chance to spawn beyond portals on death. This is undoubtedly being done because Beyond is going to be on the map device next league, and I think GGG were concerned about the possibility of having a Kalguran Scarab being used and then just creating ridiculous amounts of monsters, because Beyond can definitely go a bit berserk in an Expedition encounter at the moment. Okay, Expedition faction currency chests are now more common than other chests in Expedition logbooks, so you'll get more of the appropriate currency for the type of area that you're in. The best remnant is being rarer. This is the Runic Monsters duplicated. I think that should be no surprise to anyone. That was so powerful when you got it, that I think they've just decided, yeah, we've got to tone that down a little bit now that Expedition's no longer core. And then there's just a couple other little changes to the Expedition settings. One thing that's important is that there's going to be Expedition Watchstone modifiers. Presumably these replace the Perandus ones, some of which can increase the amount of Expedition rewards dropped by monsters. So here we've got the Perandus removal section. Perandus has been removed from the core game. Some sources of Perandus item rewards from other league content will be replaced by Expedition ones, as mentioned above. Perandus coins can no longer drop, although you can keep them in standard as a trophy. And interestingly, they're absolutely removing the Perandus mana map. I'm sort of surprised they're doing this. I would have thought that this was the sort of thing that would be harmless to leave in the game as some sort of, some sort of lore way of encountering Kadiro Perandus. Remove all of the interactions with Kadiro in terms of transactions and the like. Just have it be somewhere that you can go and talk to Kadiro, because he has got a whole lot of interesting voice lines and the like. The 2 divination cards that are tied to Perandus mana no longer can be obtained. Existing ones can still be turned in, but your Perandus mana cannot be opened in a map device, so you just end up with this sort of brick that sits in your stash tab. And then all of the uniques that were Perandus mana only, so 7 League Step, Umbilicus Immortalis, Tripanon, Varanustra, and Zerfi's Last Breath are being added to the core drop pool. Kind of expect these to all be very rare. Zerfi's Last Breath is in a bad state at the moment. It was so broken for so long, but then eventually GGG nerfed it and they never found a good spot for it. The effect that it has is so intrinsically overpowered that they were never able to get it in the right spot. Interestingly, they're also removing the Ivory Temple map boss. I thought that that was a perfectly fine encounter to leave in the game. That boss was fine. It was several of the Perandus bosses. I thought all the Perandus encounters were pretty good. It was the system with the coins was clunky and awkward, but I think that this is probably a mistake. But anyways, it's what they're doing. Guild improvements. So there are some massive changes coming for guilds that are really good news. You can control click items from your inventory if you've got a guild stash open, and they'll go into your guild stash, which is a huge quality of life improvement that's so overdue there. And you can do similar things with withdrawing items as well. There are guild versions of a lot of the special stash tabs, and there's also a number of changes that are being made to the guild stash history, which allows you to download the history as a CSV file, which is something that's really good. Like I know that I used to play EVE Online before it went as pay to cheat as it is now, and back in the day, the level of auditing that you could do on your corporation members, corporations being that game's term for guilds, was phenomenal, and it meant that you could catch someone that was, basically stealing from the guild all the time. And this is something that, the guild stash history is going to be improved, potentially to the point that you could actually do some of the things you could do in EVE Online. There's also guild hideouts, which is a huge thing to have, especially given that when you're in a party with fellow guild members, you can see the party leaders' portals and use them. Then if you drop party, you will seamlessly transition into your own sort of copy of the hideout. It'll still be in the guild hideout, but you'll see your own portals instead. That's the way I understand the announcement, which looks really great. So guild leaders can select a hideout to use for their guild hideouts from the ones that they've earned throughout the game, whether they're cash store ones or whether they're unlocks. And so, yeah, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff here. And yeah, there's that's just a whole lot of really good improvements. There's a number of hideout changes as well. The big thing is that the favor system is being retired entirely. So instead, you can just grab whatever decorations you want at any given time. There's also a couple of silly things in there. So, and that's the other thing, is that the leveling system for the various masters is changing as well. It's much less important than it used to be, and much less important especially than it was before the Betrayal expansion. But you can now get this by completing the Val Omnitect for Elva. That'll take you to Elva level 7, all for Nico, Farrell for Einhar, Mastermind for Jun, and the Shaper and the Elder for Zana. Now, I mentioned Shaper and Elder. I don't think that means Uber Elder. I think that just means both encounters separately. Various Watchstone modifiers related to Favor can no longer roll. If they still exist in Standard, they just do nothing. And then various other sources of Master Favor have been removed. Okay, next up there's the Uber Endgame content. So this is content that's basically supercharged versions of existing Capstone content. Sort of stuff that I think that most players that are... this is stuff that's aimed at you if you're a 36 or 40 or a 40 or 40 player. If you're a 24 or 40 player, you might well be able to improve to the point you can take this on pretty quickly. But you probably aren't there yet. So if you're the sort of person that feels like you can beat Maven's Invitation the Feared, you feel like you can beat Tier 16 Blighted maps, even Corrupt Rare and 8 mod, then this is the sort of thing that is going to be your endgame in this league, I think. Blight Ravage maps, so these drop sometimes when you beat a Tier 14 to 16 Blighted map, and they will give you, they can be anointed up to 9 times, only 3 of the same oil, and these monsters move faster and have much more life than regular Blighted maps. Uber Timeless Emblems, which will then augment, they'll provide considerable augmentation to the monsters that are in the Domain of Timeless Conflict. And there's been a couple of balance changes to Legion monsters in order to deal with some of the absolute bullshit that comes from Maraketh archers in them. There are Flawless Breachstones being added, which are a tier up from Pure Breachstones, and these will drop from Maven's Invitation the Hidden for the non-Chayula ones, or Maven's Invitation the Feared for the Chayula one. Rare monsters in Breach Domains now drop an additional reward type, with Flawless Breach Domains dropping 2. So reward type is things like the Legion symbols for a reward. And there's Breach Domain areas now have additional random modifiers, with areas from Flawless Breachstones having 4 of them. Breach Domain areas no longer have the modifier which grants additional baseline quantity. So there's a decrease in quantity of items from the Breach Domains in general, but the Flawless ones will have the same that the old Pure ones had. And a big one, loot accumulated from killing monsters in Breach Domains now drops upon reaching the boss area portal, instead of dropping through the encounter. So this is going to be a huge improvement there. Added 10 additional waves to the simulacrum. It now has 30 waves, and these will be absolutely crazy. And they have escalating chances for delirium bosses to spawn. It is now possible to get multiple boss uniques from a single run of the simulacrum. And additionally, you will get increased chances of dropping cluster jewels and stuff like that. Additionally, drop rate of delirium orbs from delirium encounters has been increased. Atlas changes. So the first thing to say about this is that there is a massive squish of the Atlas. Something like 50 maps from the Atlas, 46 to be exact, are being given a little vacation from the Atlas. So those maps will not exist in 3.16. You should still be able to run them if you own them in Standard, but if you're playing in the Scourge League, those maps just flat out won't exist. Additionally, all of the maps on the Atlas are being pushed into 4 different regions. Haywark Hamlet, Valdo's Rest, Glenack Cans, and Lyra Arthane. The other regions are being removed. So those regions, essentially you'll see each of these 4 regions will be a bit bigger than the old regions, and they will be, they'll basically be a little bit bigger than they used to be, and they will have more maps than they used to have, and everything's being shuffled around the Atlas again. All of these maps are being removed from the Atlas. Academy, and I think everyone will be happy about that one. Arachnid Tomb, was an okay one, not great. Arena, hate that map. Bazaar, that was an okay one. Beach, it's one of the better ones. Belfry, I won't miss it, a lot of people will. Bramble Valley, I won't miss it, and I don't think many people will. Burial Chambers, I'm sick of it. Cage, that's horrible. Castle Ruins, not a fan. Channel, we'll miss that one, but it is basically the same as Waterways. City Square, that one I'll miss. Cold River, that I'll miss. It's a new map, and it's kind of nice tile set. It's quite difficult to navigate, but anyway. Colonnade, which is basically very similar to a couple other maps anyway. Coral Ruins, I will not miss that at all. That's one of my least favourite maps on the whole Atlas. Courthouse, with its super deadly bosses. Coves, I'll miss that one. Crater, I will miss for the tile set only. Crystal Ore, this one is one of the more interesting and different bosses. Like, it's not ever efficient to run this boss, but I kind of like it just because the fight's a bit different. Anyway, Desert Spring, that's a boss fight that goes for way too long. Excavation, trying to remember which. Oh, that's the one with the 2 separate weak bosses in it. That won't be missed. Factory, that's one of my most hated maps in the game. Frozen Cabins, kind of like the tile set of that. I'd like it back. Anyway, Geode, one of those weird sort of hard to navigate maps. Sometimes it's really short, sometimes it's not. Graveyard, this is a super deadly map. You always think it's Cemetery. You always get the 2 of them confused, and one of them is much more dangerous than the other. Graveyard is the one with the 3 bosses, and that is really dangerous. Iceberg, Infested Valley, Ivory Temple, Jungle Valley, Lava Chamber, Marshes, Mesa, Pen, Peninsula, Phantasmagoria, Pier, Precinct, Primordial Pool, Ramparts, Residence, Scriptorium, Shipyard, Shrine, Villa, and Volcano, as well as Perandus Manor. So anyways, this is a substantial squishing of the Atlas. I think that the design intention here was to appeal to people that felt like the section of the Atlas between 16 and 32 Watchstones was no fun. Now, I kind of like that, but that section of the Atlas, I actually preferred that to being at 32 in general, because you had goals that were sort of close, that were close by to work towards, whereas once you get to 32, all the goals are like miles off in the distance. But I did a few polls on my YouTube channel, and people seem to mostly not like that section of Atlas progression. So I'm okay with this. This change is clearly catering to a majority opinion, so I'm happy to give it a try and see how it works out. This is going to make a couple of changes though. The first thing to note is it's now going to be harder to access the favoured map system. The favoured map system requires you to do every single map within a quadrant now, an octant of the Atlas as it used to be, and it is going to take you considerably longer to unlock it because there's now so many more maps in each of the regions. So where on average there were 20.5 per octant before, now that we're in a quadrant system, there's an average of 29.5. So that's going to be quite a bit longer, especially because it's going to make finding the very last one you need harder to do. Zana missions are going to become more important than they used to be, and those Zana missions are going to be for filling out those holes in your Atlas, finding those maps that you can't seem to get otherwise. That's the main change that comes to mind here. Additionally, there's a divination card reshuffle that's happening because some of these bases, some of the div cards are no longer findable because they are located only in these maps. Change to the unique courthouse map. It's now a unique haunted mansion. The unlock requirements for Zana's map device has been reduced. So, you know, instead of being 140 to unlock the top tier Zana mod, it's probably going to be 110 or 105 or something like that. Bonus objectives are now increased in effectiveness, and map tiers and locations have been shuffled. So, there have been a number of changes to where Atlas bases drop. This 4 lines here is very important. I think that this is something that you should have in mind, especially if you play solo self-found. This information that you want to copy down from the patch notes and pay attention to it when you're making a character build. So if you make a build that you've decided you want a crystal belt on, you're going to want to be mapping in Haywire Hamlet a lot. So, Haywire has the Crystal Belt, Grip Gloves, Marble Amulet, Opal Ring, and two-toned boots, Evasion, Energy Shield version. The Veldo's Rest has Artillery Quiver, Convoking Wand, Iolite Ring, Spiked Gloves, and two-tone Armor Evasion. The bases in Glenack cans are Apothecary Gloves, Blue Pearl Amulet, Cerulean Ring, and the last of the two-tone boots, plus Vanguard Belt and Vermilion Ring. And the bases in Lyra Arthane are Bone Helmet, Fingerless Silk Gloves, Fugitive Boots, Sea Glass Amulet, and Steel Ring. So make a copy of that information from the patch notes. Just keep it aside. It's really, really useful information to have written down. Some of the prophecies where their existing targets have been moved have had new spots for them. That'll be clear when you get them. Now, the option for the Maven to release all bosses at once is now a modifier found on the Maven invitations. This is a really good idea. It no longer occurs unless you open an invite with this modifier. That's a really good change. It is genuinely a difficulty mod. It's probably one of the most intense of them. So this is a very positive setup. Captured boss progress in the Uncharted Realms is no longer lost in permanent leagues when the Atlas is shuffled. If I was a standard player, I would be very upset if it was lost. You know, like you'd have to time doing a Cortex or something like that. You know, it's a huge deal to unlock the Feared or the Forgotten. So that's a good thing for standard players. Some of the map bosses you need to kill to upgrade your Pantheon have changed. This will be clearly identified on the Pantheon itself, so the details of that will be obvious enough. Crafting recipes that were previously unlocked in removed maps are now found in other maps on the Atlas. You'll be able to find out if there's a specific one you care about. Once 3.16 goes live, you'll be able to find out where it was moved to by going to the crafting bench and just looking in the unfound sections. Div card changes. The Fiend has been removed from the Shrine and has been added to Poorjoy's Asylum. So in a previous video, I think I said Putrid Cloister instead. That was wrong. It's Poorjoy's. Poorjoy's actually has quite a bit now. If it's got the Fiend and it's got Deadly Joy in it, it may be something that people want to run actually for loot again. The Fiend will be rare in Poorjoy's, but it may actually have a higher drop rate than it used to have when it was available in the Shrine. It was staggeringly rare in the Shrine. So the Fiend, for those that don't know, is the card for a 1 implicit corrupted Headhunter. The Bitter Blossom has been moved to Oshabi, Avatar of the Grove. Hopefully the Bitter Blossom has been made a pretty common drop. So this is the one that gives you a Chaos Gem that is level 21, 23 quality. And this is something that, yeah, like Oshabi is so rare to be able to access that this should probably be a somewhat common card from her. It does make a lot of sense thematically, though, to drop from her. Timeless Relic dropping from Expedition logbooks, like this is such an obvious one. This should have happened in 3.15. Anyway, the Jester drops from Ash Lessard, Vinier's Token from Palace map, Drunken Aristocrat from Laboratory map. Chains That Bind is a significant one. This drops in Dungeon map. Dungeon is a terrible tile set, but it is a tier 1 map. Now, a lot of people were sort of annoyed that it was a tier 1 map at first. I think that's something that isn't something to be annoyed about, because you will outgrow your tier 1 maps. You actually want the best maps to be in spots that are tier 16 when they're 4 Watchstone, and the tier 1, any map that is a tier 1 as a 0 Watchstone will be tier 14 as a 4 Watchstone map. So this means that at endgame you will get very few dungeon maps, and the ones that you do, you're just not going to run because that tile set is terrible. That's what Horizon Orbs exist for. Thaumaturgist from Alleyways. Alleyways was already a really good map. I'm not sure offhand what the Thaumaturgist actually is as a div card. It's not one that jumps to mind, but an extra card there is good because it already has Saint's Treasure. Dapper Prodigy from Palace. Dapper Prodigy being eye level 100, eye level 100 6-link body armor. Very, very, very good early league divination card. Jeweler's Boon drops from mineral pools now. People might actually voluntarily run mineral pools with a divination card that's very good early in the league, like the Jeweler's Boon, and also a Sea of Blue being something that's very good later in the league. There's sort of always something good there, so people could be quite happy with that. A Note in the Wind drops from Dry Sea. A Note in the Wind being the divination card for the Asenath's Helmet upgrade in Prophecy. So that's a big deal. The Academic drops in the Museum map. This is one of the inspired learning cards, and I've got to say that Museum is a strong contender for the worst map in the game. So I don't think that people are going to be farming for a specific rare jewel there, a unique jewel, even though it's a very good divination card if you get it. It's a very good item. You just don't want to be farming that map. It's horrible. Dungeon is picking up Unchained, which is the 2 implicit Crangled Facebreaker card. Pretty strong divination card, that one, and one that people don't really realize exists a lot of the time. Then there's a couple other changes. The Enthusiast, which is one of the Victoria's Influence cards, is now in Museum map. Again, it's Museum. Ugh, yuck, horrible. And More is Never Enough is one of the Scarab cards dropping from Vault. The Offspring drops from Stagnation. This is a card for Rizlatha's Coil. It was just added. Mind's Eyes, which is another 3.15 card, used to be exclusive to the boss of Crystalore. It's now dropping from the Bone Crypt map. And the Golden Era for Hegemony's Era is dropping from Basilica. So a number of changes there that I skipped over some of the ones that I felt were less significant. Obviously, I am talking with a Trade League bias here. So some of the things that might have some use to you in solo self-found, you might find something I jump past is more meaningful to you than it is to me. Atlas passive changes. So this is going to require its own video once I digest everything on it. There's just so much that is being moved around here. Key things though, that in terms of some of the strategies I've talked up using in the past, which aren't necessarily the only ones that work, there's lots of other options. Glenak Cans keeps Abyssal Army. Abyssal Army is the one that adds massive, massive, massive XP to Abysses. It's surprisingly good, especially when you stack it with other sources of Abysses on maps, like Gilded Abyss Scarabs or Winged Abyss Scarabs, and the Maven Sextant roll that grants 3 additional Abysses per map. You can get a staggering amount of total Abysses on a map that way, and then get a huge amount of increases. Like you're getting a multiplier to the number of monsters there and a multiplier to the amount of XP per map. That ends up being a pretty considerable amount of extra loot that you're getting out of those. So that's something to keep in mind as one option among many, but it is far from the only option. The other thing is that you've got all of the Beyond affinities there as well, and Beyond certainly works very, very well in conjunction with Abysses. So again, there is certainly a strategy that can be made out of taking all of the Beyond nodes and Abyssal Army. On the flip side though, this comes at a huge, huge opportunity cost. You can't take Resource Reallocation and Contested Development, which are the really powerful nodes for enhancing Elva's temples. And there's also High Value Targets, which is one of the really strong Legion nodes. So a lot of difficult decisions to make there, and we're going to have to play around with it a fair bit, especially once we get the actual layouts of these zones. And we get some clarity as to what's behind what in terms of pathing requirements. Haywire Hamlet is keeping its essences, Controlled Corruption. It's actually picking up Seance, which is one of the best nodes early in a league. It's the one that upgrades 5 rare monsters to be possessed, and also affects their entire pack to be touched by a ghost. Very dangerous mod. Don't take it in hardcore, but in trade enabled, it's really, really good. And there's also some metamorph mechanics that are there, as well as a bunch of other things. Lyra Arthane is keeping Inside Job, which is one of my favorite nodes there. That's the heist related ones. And there's also a number of other changes there. exotic goods which is the thing related to invasion bosses, is remaining in Lyra Arthane as well. So lots of stuff that you can choose between there. But the key thing with the change to 4 regions from 8 is that every point that you spend on your Atlas passives is going to have a higher opportunity cost than it used to have. You are turning down more options every time that you pick something. And so a lot of choices are going to have to be fairly deliberate because the number of Orbs of Unmaking you get is still pretty low. Veldo's Rest has some Delirium elements to it, such as Persecutory Delusion and the Singular Eternity, and also has the Strongbox mods, but also has Diplomatic Escort, the Harbinger stuff. So again, lots of stuff to choose between in Veldo's, and it's no longer possible to take all of the things that you might have wanted in the past. So that's going to be something to give some serious thought to. There's a few new there's a few new Expedition Atlas passives added. There's Distinguished Demolitionist, which increases explosive radius, which is a phenomenally powerful stat, and also increases the number of explosives you get. This is huge. Buried Knowledge is 50% increased quantity of logbooks dropped by runic monsters in areas, and areas contain 25% increased number of runic monster markers. So just Buried Knowledge on its own. So you got 3/2 times 5/4. That's 15/8. That's an 87.5% more multiplier to the number of logbooks you're going to get from Buried Knowledge alone. Distinguished Demolitionist gives you a tremendous amount of increase in the number of explosives or things you can hit. Ancient Writings, Remnants have 40% chance to have an additional suffix mod. Expeditions in areas have 2 more remnants. And small expedition passives have 3% chance to contain an expedition encounter. So these are all pretty significant. They're going to give you a lot of access to a more intense version of 3.15's mechanic, essentially. Once you juice up an expedition with this, it's going to be pretty crazy with six explosives that you can fire off, each of them hitting a larger area and dropping more logbooks than they used to. They're not quite going to feel like running a logbook in 3.15 does, but they're going to feel sort of almost a bit close to it. So that's going to be a big deal. Number of changes to existing Atlas passives to discuss quickly here. So the Rich Veins and Sulfite Sentinels have been combined, and this provides Voltaxic Sulfite Veins and chests in areas have a 10% chance to contain double Sulfite. Sulfite Veins and chests in areas are guarded by Sulfite hoarding monsters. Epidemiology no longer provides blighted maps found in areas are anointed. It now has blight chests in areas have 100% more chance to contain blighted maps, as it already has, and lanes of blight encounters in areas have a 35% chance for an additional reward chest. So this is sort of losing something and gaining something else, and I think broadly speaking it's slightly better than it was, but it's not clearly better, just a bit better. Flash Breach now also grants breaches in areas have 30% increased monster density. That's a big deal. That was already a good node. Time Dilation now has now grants incursions in areas have 33% chance for all monsters to be at least magic instead of 100% chance. So this is basically going from something I didn't think was worth taking to something that's worse, but I do think it's now in a better location. That it is. It's in Glenat Cans. So you might actually use this now, even though it's actually being nerfed a lot, it's being moved somewhere that you might now feel it's worth using. Other things that have been changed in the Uncharted realms, there's a slight nerf to the Master Mission one, which I don't really see the point for. It's like Master Missions, by the time you got access to the Uncharted realms, you probably have infinite Master Missions. I'm taking like 100 of each Master to Standard. So yeah, anyways, that's a change. Then there's things where favor is being removed because there's no benefit to it. Delve changes. The delve changes are considerable. Basically, all of the trivial parts of delve are being made optional. That's essentially the summary of the changes. Additionally, there's going to be much more of a bias towards getting your delve fossils and resonators from delve. So delve will give more fossils and more resonators, and they will be rarer out of delve. The big change though is that you will be able to start at like once your character is already pretty powerful, like once you've completed much of the Atlas, you'll be able to go into Delve for the first time, and when you do so, you will be going in and the Delve content that you're encountering will be reasonably engaging. It's not going to be snooze mode until you do like 100 levels of really boring content that your character is way too powerful for. But if you're struggling a bit and you want to play around in Delve to get your character a bit stronger for a while, you're free to do that too. You can run sideways for a bit instead. You don't need to jump straight into the harder content in Delve, but if you want to, you can. Additionally, there's going to be more bosses, and there's going to be a few more cities. Cities will often be smaller, but there'll be more of them. And when they do spawn, they won't spawn as the tiny sort of failed cities you sometimes see. There'll always be at least one node in them. A bunch of other little minor changes as well. Oh, the other things that's changing, some of the fossils are changing as well. Bloodstained fossils corrupt an item, granting them a corrupted implicit. So this is replacing the old Val modifiers. I kind of have to test this out. I feel like this is a nerf to them, but I want to just test it out and be sure of that. There's certainly some potential for this to give powerful items. So yeah, we'll see how that works out. Enchanted fossils have been completely removed and replaced by deaf fossils. I'll miss the enchanted fossils, but I think I'll be one of the few people it does. They now are critical strike modifiers, and they also block attribute mods. So this is a total redesign of the old enchanted fossils. Encrusted fossils are being changed to be attribute modifiers with no crit. So these are going to be two sort of opposites of each other now. And they're basically... Encrusted fossils had lost their purpose. Enchanted fossils I thought still had a purpose. But anyway, with the changes that took place in Ultimatum to enchanting that happened then, enchanted fossils had lost a lot of their appeal. Tangled fossils are being reworked completely. And they are now going to have a totally different niche to what they had before. So they're going to make a random modifier type much more likely. And I think the term much more likely is stronger than the, say, more likely that you would get on a, Scourge fossil, which says fire modifiers more likely, no cold modifiers. Tangled fossil will make something much more likely. Much more likely, I believe, means 100 times as likely to roll that type of mod. So that can be quite interesting. The effects are fully revealed once a resonator is fully socketed. So that's going to create a situation where tangled fossils, you'll socket them into a resonator and then you'll either get something staggering or get something really bad. Or you might get something that's niche that you've got no use for, but that someone else does. So yeah, I think they'll be interesting. Tangled fossils did have a couple of niche uses, but they're going to have new ones now. That's essentially what's happening. Labyrinth changes. We've sort of already discussed this. The Labyrinth trials are becoming optional entirely, and that's really the main thing that's changing with respect to the Labyrinth. Then there's the changes that are coming up here to ailment mitigation. I did a whole video on this on day 3, I think it was, that they talked about ailment mitigation. This is sort of massive, and I'm not going to retread that, except to say that if you want to have a look at this, it's substantial. It's a considerable buff in general to characters' ability to mitigate ailments. I do think that some things are going to have to wait until we see the exact details of the passive tree mastery system. Flasks. This was again discussed in that same previous development manifesto, which was when they basically gave us a whole section of the tree. Of the patch notes earlier. So this is a monstrously long section, and I did a monstrously long video on it, talking all about the changes that were happening to Flasks. Core character defenses and recovery. This was another one of those manifestos. I think it might have been day 4 of the spoiler season. Link down below to the actual details of the video that I put out on it, but it's a long one. I won't retread it because we talked about it earlier. There's just so much that was done there that, you know, like, you really do want to have a read of this. But basically, the very short version, Dodge is being removed entirely from the game. Spell dodge is being replaced by a mechanic called spell suppression, which is a percentage chance to mitigate 50% of the damage from spells. And block is being nerfed a little bit. In exchange for this, armor and evasion and energy shield are being considerably buffed. Armor and evasion are being buffed considerably mechanically, and evasion is numerically through the Sacred Orb / Uber quality system. There's also some changes to energy shield recharge as well, and the Ghost Dance mod is being removed from the Trickster Ascendancy and added to the general passive tree. So that's all of the defenses section. That was a huge part of the patch notes. And actually, we still haven't gotten through everything here. And that's right, shields were getting some new mods, and blind is getting nerfed as well. So Fortify details are still being detailed. Like there's been a couple of changes to this so far, but basically the key change, because this wasn't known at the time that we were talking about the defenses overhaul, sources of Fortify now grant a number of stacks of fortification based upon the percentage of the enemy's ailment threshold that you dealt with the hit that applied Fortify to you, with a large bonus against unique and rare monsters. You have 1% less damage taken from hits for each stack of fortification, and it lasts 5 seconds by default. Fortification from multiple melee hits or different sources stacks up to a default cap of 20 stacks. You only gain fortification stacks from one hit every 200 milliseconds. A whole bunch of changes to Fortify clusters and all sorts of things here. Basically, this is changing the situation so that Fortify is a melee defense, much more so than it was in the past, where it was something that, you know, all sorts of different ascendancies and builds could use. It is now something that recognizes that melee characters are in more inherent danger, and therefore rewards them with additional defenses for that danger. Huge amount of details here, though, that are worth having a look through. And then the next section was support characters, auras, and other reservation effects. Again, this is a huge overhaul. I think this was the day 5 video. I'm not going to go through all of this again. It's a massive amount of information to go through. That also covered elemental damage over time. And I will just clarify that the current state of play, so this is before mastery effects are considered, the current state of play appears to be that player damage over time effects seem to be comparable to or slightly better than they were in 3.15. And Ignite, though, is much better. Ignite is going to be much better than it was in 3.15. Okay, so now we're just jumping through here. Flamesurge is being overhauled as well. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a burning ground that deals damage equal to a percentage of the Ignite if you hit an ignited enemy. So burning ground can be created once per 2 seconds, and 50% of ignite damage on the enemy converted to burning ground. The idea here is that if an enemy is already on fire, Flamesurge is going to spread that fire onto the ground, and as long as that enemy remains in it, they're going to take a considerable extra chunk of damage from it. So there is a huge amount of changes that are being made to the passive tree. And the core mechanical change they're doing is making it so that many of the sort of clusters on the passive tree that don't really have, like a lot of the clusters don't have an identity. You know, a cluster on the passive tree can be, this cluster grants 52% increased critical strike multiplier. And you take that, then you also take the one that provides 47% because critical strike multiplier is so good you want all of it that you can get. And then there's another cluster that provides 40% crit multi and 30% base crit chance, and you take that as well. But they're very similar to each other. So that's one type of cluster on the passive tree, that's the pure stats. The other type is the ones that have build around effects. And here I'm thinking things like Intensify +1 or Unleash +1 or things like that. And those often can be so essential that you have to take them if you're playing a build that can use them. And so what they've changed with the mastery system is that now each cluster on the passive tree is getting some sort of affinity. So if it's a fire cluster, it'll have a fire affinity. Once you've allocated at least one notable in that cluster, you can then allocate a fire-themed mastery point for that cluster. Now, this is going to create a situation where clusters with multiple notables in them get a little bit worse than they are now, and clusters that have only a single notable get better. But your character overall should get quite a lot better, and that's because these mastery points tend to be about as good as a notable. So the percentage of points that you're allocating as travel nodes or small nodes will decrease. The percentage that you're allocating as powerful nodes will increase. So there's a whole bunch of other changes that are happening. Damage over time clusters are being improved. That's something that we're definitely going to be paying attention to once we get the new tree for building. And then there's a whole bunch of changes that are happening here. But the key thing we need to see here is that we need to get access to the JSON file for the tree. This is not yet revealed at the time I'm recording this video, which is Saturday evening, my time over in Australia. So we're just going to have to wait for that. That's going to have so much of the information that we need to really assess the changes on the passive tree. I think that the last truly long video that I put out during this spoiler season will be the one where I discuss the passive tree changes. So a whole bunch of cluster jewel notables are being changed to masteries, or not a whole bunch, but a few are. So those are being moved to be masteries instead. And then there's a number of things where, because of the sweeping changes made to the passives, existing anointments that apply a notable which has been removed will now apply a different notable. We've also taken this opportunity to review the oil combinations required for notables. So expect that the most powerful nodes on the tree will probably end up being 2 gold oils, maybe even 3, or they'll use 1 golden oil and 1 silver. And then the more typical power level ones will be all over the place. Ascendancy changes. So Gladiator and Trickster have lost a notable from their Ascendancy because it's been moved onto the core tree. So there are new notables being added to both of those Ascendancies. And additionally, a couple of other notables are getting changed within the Ascendancies as well. So in the Chieftain, Tassalio Cleansing Water now gets 20% of physical damage from hits taken as fire damage instead of 15%. This is a buff, and 20% increased life recovery rate if you've taken fire damage from an enemy hit recently, where it used to be 50%. This is a nerf. Overall, I think this puts Tassalio in a place where it is better at protecting you from one-shots, worse at protecting you from chip damage, and maybe actually slightly worse overall, but it's still very, very powerful. It's still a strong draw to playing a Chieftain. Gladiator, passives with block have been fully reworked. Painforged now has 10% chance to block attack damage, cannot be stunned by hits you block, and counterattacks deal double damage. New notable replacing Versatile Combatant, which is 10% to maximum block chance, plus 10 to armor and evasion rating per 1% block chance. And Violent Retaliation now has an ignore enemy monster physical damage reduction if you blocked in the last 20 seconds, and attack damage is lucky if you've blocked in the last 20 seconds. So attack damage is lucky is one of those stats that is much more powerful for some builds than for others. If you can make a lightning damage based attack build that is a Gladiator, this mod is absolutely bonkers on it. So this might even be build defining. Got to really look at the whole tree and look at all of the relevant options, but I would at least be thinking along the lines of, do you want to do some sort of lightning damage based Gladiator? Because the reason I say that is that lightning damage inherently has the widest spread. So attack damage being lucky, let's say you're dealing an average of 50 damage. If you're dealing that with a fire or cold hit, you might be dealing 40 to 60 damage. And the luck factor on that takes your average up from 50% to, from 50 damage to 53 and a third. Or about 53. I think it's about 53 and a third. No, I think it's about 2/3 of the way up. About 2/3 from bottom to top. On the flip side, if you've got a lightning skill, you'll be 1 to 99 damage. And so your lucky rolls will average about 67. So you can see how the being lucky on a lightning skill is something like a 33% more damage multiplier, whereas it might only be a 10% or 10 or 15% more multiplier on a cold or fire skill, or physical for that matter. So for that reason, Violent Retaliation is definitely worth a look. You do need to turn it on by blocking hits every now and again, and obviously you're going to get no value from the ignore enemy monster physical damage reduction component of it, but if you're building a lightning one, you don't care about that stat anyway. Inquisitor, Pious Path is getting a little bit better, neither here nor there. Raider, there's a couple of changes here, and they're mostly milder nerfs because of the change from dodge to, well, the re-evaluation of how dodge works and the like. Quartz Infusion no longer has 15% chance to dodge attack hits or spell hits, instead grants 40% chance to suppress spell damage. So this is considerable still. It is nowhere near as incredibly powerful as 15% attack and spell dodge was, especially given that Raiders would have previously had acrobatics, phase acrobatics, providing that was just a tremendous defensive layer. But 40% spell suppression is actually pretty meaningful. It's going to provide you with a good deal of protection against being one-shot. Avatar of the Veil is getting no longer grants nearby enemies have 20% less accuracy rating while you have phasing. This might sound like a big deal, but with the changes to the evasion formula, this is not as bad as it sounds. And Avatar of the Chase no longer grants 35% more chance to evade melee attacks during onslaught or evade projectile attacks during onslaught. Instead provides 10% more chance to evade attacks during onslaught. Again, this is a nerf, but it's kind of necessary with how much they were buffing evasion. Without that, the Raider would have been very, very, very easily able to hit the evasion cap, especially with the massive buffs to evasion's core numbers. Trickster. Trickster is getting a Patient Reaper nerf, which it really didn't need. Escape Artist is being, well, no longer requires Ghost Dance, which has been replaced by a new notable. No longer grants 5% increased attack speed per Ghost Shroud or cannot be stunned while you have Ghost Shroud. Added a new notable which replaces Ghost Dance, which says every 10 seconds take no damage over time for 5 seconds. So I, broadly speaking, think that the Trickster has gone from bad to worse with this package of changes. Fire damage over time builds might be coming back, but they won't be Tricksters, they'll be something else. Saboteur now grants 15% reduced damage taken from blinded enemies, previously 10%. This is kind of necessary because of the considerable nerfs to blind that are taking place as part of the defenses overhaul. I still think that this means Saboteur will be a little bit, like taking the entire package of changes to defenses, I think the Saboteur will be a little bit weaker than it was before. That's sort of okay with me though. It was one of the top ascendancies in the game for a fair period of time, and it's not squishy, like it's not super squishy. And it also has access to Ghost Shrouds now as well, which is something it didn't have previously. So yeah, taking the entire package of changes, I think the Saboteur is in maybe about the same place as it was, maybe a smidgen worse. Ascendant. Is the Trickster version is getting a modest nerf to it that it doesn't need. The Raider passive is getting, like, it's a dodge is being changed into suppressed spell damage, and the Gladiator point is being sort of changed around a lot. Essentially, not very many changes to the Ascendant because they're not to the more popular of the options. Awaken supports are being buffed and a lot, but the buffs are mostly coming at gem level 5. So for instance, Awakened Elemental Focus now grants +1 to the level of supported elemental skill gems at gem level 5. And there's a whole bunch of stuff like this. Some of the really interesting ones, Awakened Elemental Damage with attacks now grants elemental damage from supported skills cannot be reflected at gem level 5. That's a big deal. Like, that's a really big deal. That's something that's going to have quite a lot of impact on playing around, like on players that are using elemental damage builds. They're going to really, really want this Awakened gem because it's just going to solve a huge problem for them. Awakened Burning Damage now grants +1 to the level of supported fire skill gems at level 5. All sorts of things like this that are going to have a big, big, big impact on a lot of these sorts of Awakened gems. So going through here, the other ones that stand out a bit, Awakened Hex Touch now grants +1 level of Cursed Gems. That's mostly neither here nor there, but that's quite good in conjunction with Despair. Despair scales a bit more with gem level than most curses do, so if you're using Despair, going from Hex Touch to Awakened Hex Touch is a bigger deal than it has been in the past. And yeah, just a whole bunch of other things that are going on, like Awakened minion damage is now miles better than it was. Awakened multi-strike is better again. And yeah, all in all, you're really going to want these things. They are really, really, really strong. And there's also much more of a situation of almost every Awakened support gem is good now. It's no longer going to be, you've got sort of 3 or 4 that are mechanically better than the core skill, like Awakened Spell Cascade. Instead, there'll be a good reason to want all of them. Melee range is getting changed a bit. It's not a huge overall package of changes, but basically those gems that scale up through strike, those strike skills that scale up melee range over level generally are just going to have a set point that they fit at, and there's a couple of new itemized options for strike range. So probably the more significant thing here is that the veiled and crafted modifiers on helmets and gloves that granted level of melee gems and melee strike range now grant +2 strike range instead. And also the Warlord's Reach unique jewel is better, but some of this power for some specific skills is like, say, for instance, Frenzy and Elemental Hit is going to come at the expense of the core gem, whereas some other gems like Bone Shatter are going to keep this +2 to strike range. Essentially, it's just changing, it's sort of standardizing it, making melee skills care less about their gem level and more about their gear. Now, we've got the nerfs. Shield skills. So Spectral Shield Throw is being nerfed, but not as hard as some people might have expected, but it is going to perform considerably worse on very entry-level gear. So one of the things that a lot of people found with Spectral Shield Throw when they used it as a league starter was that in absolute dumpster tier gear, it was really, 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 really good. And then it was sort of hard to get any meaningful upgrade past that. They're changing it so that when you just get into maps, it's going to be pretty anemic damage. And then when you upgrade your shield, each shield upgrade is going to be more impactful. At the top end, Spectral Shield Throw is going to be a little bit worse than in 3.15, but it is far from the smashing nerfs that many people expected. However, the helmet enchant is getting really kicked hard. Additionally, the critical strike jewel is getting hurt pretty hard. So that's the thing that empowers the Raider version of the build. I still think that the Raider version is viable. I actually think that every Spectral Shield Throw build from 3.15 will still be viable, but they're going to be meaningfully weaker than they were in 3.15, especially when you don't have much in the way of gear. On the flip side, we have Forbidden Rite Totems. Forbidden Rite Totems are not going to be a build in 3.16, I don't think. The totems are losing 60% of their life. Some of the scaling methods are being lost. Totems are also getting a bunch of damage reduction, so that the fact that they're losing this life doesn't really matter all that much for the purposes of other totem builds. But for totem builds that scale off life, which is Righteous Fire Totems, Forbidden Rite Totems, and Dark Pact Totems, this is a significant nerf. Torch Oak Step are being nerfed as well, so they're going to give less life. Ancestral Preservation's being nerfed. Basically, it's just a whole bunch of changes. I don't think Forbidden Rite Totems is going to survive as a build in 3.16. That doesn't mean it's going to be totally unplayable, but I think that a 6-linked Forbidden Rite in 3.16 will feel about as strong as a 4-linked one in 3.15 did. Other 3.15 skills are getting changed. Voltaxic Burst, Explosive Concoction, aka Flask Eating, Absolution and Ambush are getting buffed. Absolution might just get enough from having 4 additional base radius at gem level 20, and also having the 25% chance to summon a Sentinel of Absolution on hitting a rare or unique enemy. The key thing, though, that Absolution is still missing is a way for there to be some shared stat where scaling either your character cast speed scales your minion cast speed, or scaling your minion cast speed scales your character cast speed. That's the key thing Absolution is still missing, and I think that without it, I'm not looking to play it again. Voltaxic Burst is getting a boost to its base critical strike chance, and also getting an interesting little mechanic where it gets 1% more damage with hits and ailments per cast of the spell that is waiting to go off. So this is an interesting mechanic that means that you can get a bit of extra damage if you just fire up a whole bunch of them at once. Kind of wanted to play around with this skill and didn't get around to it in 3.15. It looks like it's interesting. It also looks like it's pretty weak, but it might just have what it takes now with these extra little buffs. I don't think it was derisory in performance. I think it was just a little bit below optimal. So with these buffs, it might end up being enough. Cast on trigger mana multipliers are being changed, and there's now just simply being some numbers changes that are aimed at keeping the overall mana use of these skills about where it is in 3.15 post the mana changes. So after 3.15.0.d, but the way that 3.15 is now, the mana situation for cast on trigger multipliers should feel about the same as it does now, but the actual cause of the drain will be changed so that it's, there's a higher cost per trigger and a lower cost per attack, basically. But there's no intent here for this to change the overall amount of mana that you're using. Spectral Throws mana cost is being reduced. This is a buff. Ward is being buffed on items. So Runic Crowns, for instance, are now going to have 164 base ward instead of 137. These are not... I still don't think that Ward is going to get there. What Ward needs is some sorts of items that provide both Ward and Evasion on the same item. That is the defensive thing that is needed in order for Ward to be a particularly strong sort of defense, core defense. I don't think it's going to get there just based on this change. Breach uniques. There are some changes that are being made to breach uniques. I talked about the Skin of the Lords changes in a separate video, but Tullfall is getting a buff. Escher's Visage is being changed so that it no longer shuts off its protection from chaos damage when you are on low mana. It still does if you're on low life, but it no longer does on low mana. So this is going to be pretty significant for some, like there'll be some weird builds that can use this. And I think it will provide a new option for having mitigation of chaos damage. I don't know that it'll be used all that much, but it's something new and different. United in Dream is getting a considerable buff. Considerable buff, and it's something that really needs it. This is the upgraded version of Severed in Sleep, one of the Chayula exclusive uniques. And then, yeah, some other changes are being made to fix up, like to add the new keystones to Skin of the Lords. And Voices of the Storm and Choir of the Storm, these now both grant critical strike chance is increased by overcapped lightning resistance. Previously was increased by lightning resistance. Choir of the Storm now has neg 30 to lightning resistance. So this is something that can grant you an enormous amount of critical strike chance on your amulet, as long as you are willing to invest massively in overcapping your lightning resistance. Critical tag. A number of gems are just getting a critical tag modifier added to them. This just makes it easier to identify which gems are critical strike oriented. Atzuri unique drops. This was discussed in a previous video, but basically Atzuri's Disfavor is now being moved to normal Atzuri. Pledge of Hands is being removed from the core drop pool and added to Uber Atzuri, and Atzuri's Acuity is being buffed. Clever Construction. Some part of Clever Construction's protection for your traps and mines is being made baseline. Val Immortal Call, which is only available in Standard, is getting nerfed enormously, which is probably about the 5th time for that skill gem. Unwavering Focus is is something that stacks a lot, and it's losing some of its extreme ability to stack. Unique map boss Ailment Threshold. Some specific bosses, and this is Putrid Cloister, Vinctor Square, Doryani's Machinarium, and Hallowed Ground, are getting their ailment thresholds reduced. Specific weird and wonderful location crafts. Some of these are being moved into unique maps. So some of these are being moved into just unusual places. So on the Atlas, so things like the trap modifiers that were previously in the Incursion Temple are now being moved into regular maps, and things like the meta mods that were previously attached to Prophecy are being moved into unique maps. There's basically a massive nerf to the time necessary to unveil unlock all of the unveils. And so they're now, all veiled modifiers will unlock all tiers from one unveil. So this is just one of those systems that players have never, like, it's funny that a lot of players ask for deterministic crafting, and then we had a quite powerful deterministic crafting system in the veiled item system that was a case of you had to unlock various mods, and then once you had them, you knew exactly what you were going to get. This is now being basically simplified to be another copy of the crafting bench, essentially. So that's the situation there. Okay, this is an interesting one. Oshabi. The Sacred Blossom boss fight doesn't have a sufficiently valuable unique reward. The Forbidden Shako unique that is intended to be this reward is outclassed by Replica Forbidden Shako from Heist. So, Replica Forbidden Shako is going legacy. Forbidden Shako is being changed to match the values of Replica Forbidden Shako. This is a really interesting one. So Oshabi is now going to get a fairly high drop rate, very, very, very chase unique. So this is a really interesting decision that they've made there. I kind of think they could change the Replica Forbidden Shako, like leave it in Heist and have it be have the stats of the old Forbidden Shako. But anyways, it's going for the moment. I don't think anyone would be particularly excited to get that there. So added damage on quivers. I did a separate video on this, but basically there are new options for crafting quivers that could be quite good. Quivers on unarmed characters are no longer going to work at all. It was never intended, and they're not going to work. Skill gem weapon restrictions are going to be fixed up to specify the details of what weapons they can be used with. And there's been an update here that Ancestral Protector, Warchief, and Vile Ancestral Warchief will work unarmed. It was originally a mistake when these were first posted, and that wasn't put there. Trap enchantments granting cast speed are going to be changed to give trap throwing speed instead. This is because cast speed used to have benefits on trap skills, which doesn't anymore. Golems are picking up a point of life regen, 1% per second. Harvest craft changes are being simplified. There's no real change in power. Actually, this is a slight buff. The ones that used to only work on normal and magic items are now being changed into, well, and the ones that did the same things on rare items are being merged into one craft that you can use on anything, normal, magic, or rare. That's the Reforged crafts. I'm trying to think if there's any way to really do anything ridiculous with this. Maybe on a magic item, if you started with a weapon that was sourced from Merciless Armaments, that's a divination card that grants a 1 mod magic weapon that will have Merciless, which is top tier physical damage percent. And then if you were to craft prefixes, can't be changed on that. I need to think about that a lot more. I don't think that would work actually, but we'll have to play around with it and see exactly if this has any changes. Just beyond making Reforge and Reforge Plus a bit more common than they were before. Synthesis unique maps are being buffed slightly. They will have more quantity, pack size, and rarity as a result of these changes. Effects that cause a mark skill to be triggered on hitting a rare or unique enemy will be buffed to only trigger if you don't have a marked target. That sounds like a nerf, but it's actually a buff in practice. It's going to stop these from burning your mana. 2 skills have got the name Tornado, and so the Sakawal's Flock unique helmet is being renamed to Twister. Syndicate Operative Spectres are being nerfed hard, which is something that should probably surprise no one, given that as much as everyone likes to say that 3.15 was a league of Forbidden Rite Totems and Spectral Shield Throw, actually the most successful build in the league was Spectres on any metric that you can think of, and so Spectres are taking a nerf. Negative resistances. This is a nerf to Doryani's Prototype, a unique armor that was introduced a couple of leagues ago that is now a tier 1 rarity unique in the Drop Anywhere pool. Because of the Scourge League allowing you to stack a lot of negative resists, they're introducing a cap of negative 200 as the lowest that your resists can go. This is a minor nerf to Doryani's Prototype, but if you are doing lightning damage, like if you're stacking negative lightning resistances, you're still going to do staggering damage while wearing Doryani's Prototype. You'll be fine. Zana mods, discussed these earlier, but basically there's a few fan favorites present. Beyond is present, Legion is present. They should be quite popular. A couple of things that are missing from here. One that I noticed, well, obviously Delirium's missing. I'm sort of miss Heist as well. I'd like to see Heist back as a Zana League mod. But anyway, we've got what we've got. We've got a pretty good setup here. Beyond being on the map device means that Headhunter is going to be expensive this league. Because once you get access to Beyond on the map device and a Headhunter, you are in ridiculously overpowered mode. User interface improvements. You can now scroll out further on the passive skill tree. That is a fantastic little change. Introduce a search field to the Expedition locker to allow filtering of stored logbooks. This is a great change. Pressing control click on Zana in your hideout now brings up the purchase items interface instead of the Atlas. Again, I think this is generally an improvement. Generally, I would just hit G if I wanted to bring up my Atlas. Maybe that's just me. Is it G or is it H? H is challenges and prophecies, isn't it? So yeah, I think I'd hit J. It's muscle memory anyway when you do it. Skill bar is being tweaked to fit skill icons a little bit more nicely. Got to see that in practice. Hopefully I agree that it's nicer. Skill bar user interface will now display if a skill has dealt a critical strike when you have Elemental Overload Keystone allocated. That's a big improvement there because otherwise having it in the top right of the screen, if you've got multiple skills that have Elemental Overload, that's going to be really messy. Added a slot for the Sacred Orb to the Currency Stash tab. That is a good thing. Slot for Perandus coins is hidden unless you add one of those coins. Again, that's a good thing because they're not going to be available in the upcoming leagues. Added slots for Breach Blessings, finally, Flawless Breach Stones and Unrelenting Timeless Emblems to the Fragment Stash tab. Breach Blessings definitely is an overdue change, and Flawless Breach Stones and Unrelenting Emblems, I'm glad to see that they're getting that done before we need to complain about it. And this is the big one. Added designated slots for Delirious maps to the Delirium Stash tab. This is finally. That may actually be worth getting now. Slots for Alchemical Resonators in the Delve tab are now hidden unless and until you store one of them, which again, they're not going to exist in temp leagues because they're being replaced by chaotic ones. So if you would have had 2 Alchemical and 1 chaotic drop, you'll instead get 3 chaotic drop. Quest rewards details, just basically have a look through this. What I would suggest you do is if you've got skills, if you're wanting to league start one of the new skills and you want to find out when it's available and to what classes, then just Control F on this page for quest rewards. PvP changes do not affect Royale, but it is no longer possible to create PvP only characters in Path of Exile. So basically, I think it's not been a success, that experiment that they did with that. Glacial, and then there's just a couple other numbers changes. And then we have a bunch of bug fixes. The big one here, which is really significant, which is that they fixed a bug where magic and rare monsters in area level 85 plus areas had half the life they were meant to have. I think that one might be pretty impactful. Another thing that's significant, fixed a bug where 101% reduced projectile speed or higher would cause projectiles to move infinitely fast. So it's like one of those things where once you got below 0 on your projectile speed, it was treated as be some sort of wraparound effect where it would be treated as infinite speed, or not infinite, but 2 to the 32 minus 1% of baseline speed, which is a little bit faster than it should be. Fixed a couple of bugs related to ritual altars, and this one's significant. Fixed a bug where Corrupting Fever could snapshot the amount of damage dealt per second with the Corrupting Blood debuff. So there was a bug, borderline exploit that was around where you could cast Corrupting Fever whilst wielding Cold Iron points, then weapon swap to something else. That is gone. If you do that, you will lose 6 levels on your Corrupting Fever as soon as you weapon swap out of your Cold Iron points. And then there's just a whole bunch of other changes here that are more or less impactful. Most of these are things that relate to the things that are pretty minor. Like things like fix a bug where delirium demons could appear from orbs summoned by the Maven when she witnessed a boss fight in a map. Like little bugs that don't often come up, but when they do, they're pretty annoying. And then there were some bugs with the incubators where where the items weren't dropping at all. And so there's just a whole bunch of little bugs that are being fixed, but nothing particularly significant there. One thing that's of note, if you've read through this already, changes since the original post was made. Quartz Flasks now grant 10% chance to suppress spell damage. And there's some details on Escape Artists that were changed there. So if you read them at the start, then that's been modified since then. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this marathon. As I said, I told you it would be a long one. It was a long one. May your Varlobs have interesting results, and I will see you around.